Good evening, Liberty Meers, and everybody else who's watching. This is Jeffrey Tucker, CLO of Liberty.me, and it's my pleasure to welcome Torsten Hoffmann here from. Are you in Sydney, Torsten, or
Melbourne?
In Melbourne, that's right, and that's where we met, I think, right?
We met in New Zealand, just next door, basically. Yeah.
Okay, in New Zealand. Okay. Well, yeah. That's right. Like I hang out in those parts of the world all the time, right? But you are the producer of the movie Bitcoin, The End of Money as We Know It. Where does that stand right now? Can we watch it online? Or are you doing a slow release? Where is it? Where is it right now?
Yeah, no, I totally believe in releasing it as fast as we can and everywhere we can. So we are available for Bitcoin on a place called the Protocol TV. We just launched on iTunes, and most of our transaction actually come from Vimeo on demand.
Is that right? So they accept it's like a pay-per-view system at Vimeo?
Yeah, correct. And obviously, you know, as a filmmaker of a film about Bitcoin, there's a lot of piracy going on because the audience is very savvy in peer-to-peer technology. So unfortunately, yeah, we're all over the illegal sites. But I would ask anyone to at least then send a small donation or something like that. Yes,
that's exactly the right way. Can you watch it with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so that's a small platform based in Atlanta, actually, called the Protocol TV. So you just shoot them a few coins, and then it unlocks the video. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I think it showed in Las Vegas at Freedom Fest. Am I right about that?
Yeah, correct. You were there, right? I wasn't.
Well, I wasn't able to watch it, but I was on the panel afterwards with Patrick Byrne, George Gilder, of all people, who was awesome, and a few other people. And so yeah,
Naomi was there.
Naomi was there, right? And we had a wonderful discussion. It lasted about an hour and a half. But I tell you, Torsten, the room was packed. I mean, it was like you couldn't even get in the room. I mean, all the standing room was taken, but there were people outside in the hall, and many gave up. And this is in a big theater too.
Yeah, no, I heard that the response was people in the libertarian circles are getting more and more interested in Bitcoin. You've been saying this for years, but I think now we've hit that point. And I was very proud to get 2 awards at the event as well. So we won Best International Documentary and Best Libertarian Theme. So that's really, really great.
Now you're some experienced filmmaker, right? This is not your first project.
Well, I've been in the industry for almost 15 years, but it's my first one that I direct and wrote myself. I was executive producing many other documentaries before, but it's the first project that I am in control of.
And you were filming and writing and editing for a year and a half, something like that?
That's correct. Actually, the interview we shot with you was our very first shoot in Miami. The Miami, what's it called, Bitcoin South? I don't even remember the name of that convention. Then we went to Toronto, then to New York twice, to London, and here in Melbourne as well. So it was a 1.5 year period. We did a Kickstarter in between, so we raised a little bit of funds on Kickstarter, but most of it was self-financed by myself.
Well, you know, it's funny to think a year and a half ago, I'm trying to think this through. A year and a half ago, Bitcoin was approaching about $800 to the Bitcoin. And then you started the documentary, and then we saw this long slide down to, I think, as low as $200. In the course of this, did you ever worry that you had picked the wrong project?
Good question. Well, first let me say it turns out that this peak, right, was actually never a real peak, right? I mean, the more we know about Mt. Gox, the more it turns out that it was just falsified data or a fraudulent exchange. So I don't think Bitcoin were actually ever at $1,000. But yeah, I mean, certainly the buzz around Bitcoin has slowed down for a long time. I always thought that it's it's not about the exchange rate. It's not about the current news about this scandal or this arrest or this scammer. It's more about the technology and how it changes money and the implication it has on central banking. So I wasn't really worried. No.
I have to tell you, Torsten, as much as I follow Bitcoin news and opinion, that is the first time I've heard anybody that price spike up to $1,200 was actually artificial and a result of Mt. Gox. Do you want to explain that anymore? Just because I'm curious about that. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, so I'm also not an expert. I think that there's 2 or 3 things going on. So first of all, there were automatic trading bots active at Mt. Gox, which kind of pushed the price up, and it was like all fake transactions. So that was definitely happening, and a report came out maybe a year ago. But now that the former CEO of Mt. Gox is arrested in Japan, Mark Karpeles, a lot more comes to surface, and he was fudging the numbers, and the company turns out didn't even have a bank account. It was all going through his private bank account. So there's a lot of things going wrong there, and now people say, well, that was typical at the time for Bitcoin. That was still amateur hours. Now we have professionals and the big Wall Street guys coming in. You mentioned Patrick Byrne earlier as one example. So yeah, it's the next step in the evolution of Bitcoin.
Well, it's funny. I feel, I'll admit this to you, Torsten. I mean, I'm sure that there's plenty of wrongdoing at Mt. Gox, and actually a lot of people lost a lot of money, and I know people who are actually personally pillaged in that whole thing. But when Mt. Gox got into the Bitcoin market, Bitcoin was worth a fraction of a cent. It wasn't even a real thing. It was like a play, like a toy, and you almost get the sense with this company that it sort of fell into the big leagues without really knowing or understanding what they were getting into. Part of me kind of feels sort of sad for the situation,
Yeah, and I think you made a good point. We had a discussion about this in New Zealand. You made a good point that a lot of these scammers, they're not from the outset, it's not a scam, right? It just kind of develops and it gets worse every day, a little bit worse, and then they're just overwhelmed, right? Then millions of dollars come into their bank accounts, and they're just not set up to it. So I'm not defending what they did, but there was a lot of incompetency and maybe not as much criminal intent behind it.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, nowadays we think that Bitcoin. Well, it's funny to me, Torsten, because first of all, 10 years ago, if anybody had come to me and said, I've got an idea to make a new currency that's not tied to any existing national currency. It will be a new money just for the internet and will obtain its own value, independent of anything else, and arise organically because of a brilliant payment system. I can tell you, I would have walked away from them and said, stop wasting my time. This is stupid. It will never happen, And now here we are in 2015, and everybody thinks that Bitcoin is just a normal thing. It's just it exists, and people criticize it for other reasons, But its plausibility is not even in doubt. It shows how quickly history moves forward in some ways.
Yeah, and mentioning history, and I set out to do a film about Bitcoin, but actually what I ended up doing is talking about money most of the time. So I went all the way back to the ancient times, before there were even coins, and explained what is money and how does it work, and how was paper money first created in the Renaissance time in Italy, and things like that. So we spent half an hour to really talk about money and what's wrong with our current financial system, including central banking. And then it becomes much clearer why Bitcoin may not be such a crazy idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I felt like I knew a lot about the history of money before I looked at Bitcoin, and it seemed to me to be an outrageous idea. I mean, especially given my knowledge and understanding of history. So, I mean, congratulations. Was it your first exposure to any kind of financial monetary subject?
Well, I have a finance MBA, and I'm always interested in Wall Street topics. But it's yeah, the first time I really dig down into this. And yeah, you're right. Reading all these books about the history of money is actually quite eye-opening. Yeah.
It is, and usually, I mean, what's very interesting to me is how, I mean, it's a subject I've written a ton about, but how usually money develops out of an existing commodity, something that people already value and trade. That is not the case with Bitcoin, which is why I had such doubts for such a long time about its viability.
Yeah, and people give me feedback and say, "Wow, this is so cool! I never knew that people used whale teeth on Fiji or cow dung in Tibet as a form of currency." Right? I mean, these are like funny little tidbits of information. So I try to put in a little, fun facts and fun factoids. Even for the Bitcoin experts, there are a few very interesting little stories in the film as well.
What kind of things did you learn in the course of making the film that surprised you the most? I mean, were there things that just you went into it not knowing that you discovered on your own as a researcher?
Well, I don't think I uncovered anything like groundbreaking, right? I mean, I just read books that were already available. But for me, I mean, this whole central banking thing was a complete revelation. I mean, you've been talking about this for 10 years probably. There's books about the what's it called, the Jekyll Island, monster of Jekyll Island, or whatever. I mean, this is common knowledge among people who know it, but for me it was completely new. And I think I hope that my film also brings this kind of shocking facts about the Fed out to the public even more.
Let me ask you this: Have you did you happen to see the new Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise?
Not yet. No, tell me.
Oh, you didn't see it? Okay. Doesn't really matter. There's a scene in there where the bad guy, who has I don't know, many billions of dollars, and he's trying to transfer them, and he picks up a small tool like this and clicks a button, and several $billion, maybe tens of billions of dollars, immediately transfers from his account to somebody else's account. You see the progress bar going across and stopping, right? And as I watched that, my first thought was, that is actually not possible to do with national monies and regular banking systems and current trust-based payment systems. It is possible to do. Do you think I'm right about that?
Yeah, well, 10 billion not yet, right? I mean, the Bitcoin ecosystem is still too small, but yeah, you can transfer certainly 10 billion with a push of the button. But speaking of Hollywood, there's one film, Die Hard, that Bruce Willis action. There's one where the bad guys are all about eradicating the financial history of the world, so they can rewrite history and then become very rich. And so basically they were trying to capture and to control the ledger, right? And that's also something fascinating. What I find about Bitcoin, it's really a ledger, a global ledger, and that's the first time we have this. So we don't need to rely on banks' centralized ledgers anymore. I think that's just the most astounding fact.
So that's a really interesting point, and just so that we're clear what that implies. When I went back and researched the original valuation of Bitcoin, because I was curious about where this stuff came from. Actually, I mean, you want to know the history of Bitcoin. It's all there for you in the blockchain, and it can't be changed, right? I mean, it's like a documented history of its valuation dating back from day one, and it's available to the whole planet.
Yeah. And hopefully my film and the documentary will, without being too technical, without being too complicated, kind of open people's eyes. So I've been doing a lot of these interviews on radio, on general media, and my main message is always, guys, take Bitcoin seriously. You don't have to invest in it. There's certainly no investment advice, but just take it seriously as a technology. It's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And following the news, more and more Wall Street companies, more and more banks, more and more people are getting interested. So I think we were there at the right time.
Well, it's an excellent point because, following up on the Mission Impossible scene, I actually wrote an article today examining all the existing payment systems, from ACH to PayPal to Dwola, Facebook, Facebook Money now is a new one that came out in June, Google Wallet, wire transfers. And again, what you run into is some combination of barriers to why none of these systems can actually be modern. They're expensive. They require trust relationships. There's identity theft and fraud risk. There's transaction limits. And chargebacks. And also there's time. I mean, the time element by itself is an amazing thing for regular consumers. Like if I try to use ACH on Thursday, the person to whom I'm sending the money, the money may not clear until Tuesday, Yeah. And then you also have to pay fees, and even the ones that are free have limits and so on. I mean, like every one of these systems, and I went through all of them, they all have limits. I mean, cryptocurrency with distributed ledgers just blow through all of these problems. I mean, they solve something like 10 different existing problems. I mean, it seems to me that's enough to give it some momentum.
Yeah, the question is, where will it stick first? I mean, is it international remittances? There's many reasons why it could be. I don't know. I mean, we have a web designer in Tunisia, and PayPal doesn't work in Tunisia because it's some sort of terror list or whatever, right? So all Tunisians are labeled as terrorists. Or I mean, there are so many reasons why remittance could be the one, but maybe it's something else. I don't know. Where we will see the first kind of traction. I think maybe it has been a bit unfortunate that a lot of investors have come into Bitcoin very early on, right? So many people are holding Bitcoins and just hoping that it will increase in value, but actually not that many people are using it yet as a currency or to build super interesting projects on top. Hopefully that will happen in the next year or two.
Yeah, would you have expected Bitcoin to have made more progress up to this point? I mean, you started this a year and a half ago. Would you have expected transaction volume to increase, for the distribution to increase at a greater rate than it has?
Yeah, and I definitely, that's like one of the disappointing points for me. However, people point out to me that we don't see all these transactions because Coinbase and all these kind of large Bitcoin companies, they're not on the open ledger. They're kind of a bank in itself. So all these transactions within Coinbase are not even recorded on the blockchain. So we might not see 50% or 80% of the transactions going on in reality. But I am, overall, I'm a little bit disappointed of the adoption. I mean, yes, Expedia accepts Bitcoin and Overstock accepts Bitcoin, but I don't think there's actually much transactions going on, and I think we probably have to wait a little bit longer for that.
Yeah, and I share that sense too. I mean, it's a little presumptuous for either of us to act as if we know exactly the pace of adoption that is supposed to happen with a technology like this. But part of the problem is there's such a massive infrastructure behind the present system, whether it's credit cards and banks and governments, basically, and there's so much sunk cost in the prevailing system that it seems to be like, I have people tell me all the time, I have no particular reason to use it. Why should I convert my dollars to Bitcoin and then spend Bitcoin so they can be converted back into dollars? I mean, it doesn't make any sense for a lot of people. Or so they believe.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
Well, tell me who some of the people you interviewed in the course of making the film that you found particularly impressive, and that you're watching very carefully. Some of the intellectuals.
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole list of Bitcoin experts and entrepreneurs in the film, and journalists, and we've been very lucky to have most of the big names in the space on camera. But if you ask me for the most impressive, I would definitely mention Bernhard von Nothaus. You probably know his story better than most. Let me just try to do like a 1 minute summary. So he was the guy who invented the Liberty Dollar, and he was which is a private currency. You can explain that much better than I can. But what happened to him is very interesting. And he says that in front of camera. He basically says, well, the government didn't like what I did, and they arrested me, and they charged me for counterfeiting and fraud, and he was called a domestic terrorist, and all these things. So, and he's a direct inspiration, if you will, for the development of Bitcoin, because Satoshi saw, oh, if I centralize this, if I put my name out there, I'm a target. So I think that's very eye-opening.
You know, just so that everybody understands, this is Bernhard von Nothaus. And the Liberty Dollar came out, what, probably 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago?
Yeah.
And it was an alternative currency. So, Torsten, I'm not sure I've ever really explained just how deep my relationship and far back my relationship with this guy goes. But, you know, his idea was that he would remonetize silver, that he would get silver in coins and then also in paper money, representing money substitutes, and circulate it as widely as possible so that it could actually be remonetized and become a money independent of the dollar. And he called his thing the Liberty Dollar, which, well, anyway, just. We'll get to that in a second, but the point is that he's something of a genius, right? And an entrepreneur. But when I first encountered the guy and his idea, I was completely, I mean, this is true, completely dismissive of it, because I didn't believe that it was actually possible to invent a money just to intervene into prevailing market arrangements with a new form of money. I thought that was theoretically impossible, essentially. So I was dismissive of him, and he came to my office and wanted to meet with me, and I had no interest, and I regret. I mean, it sounds like a scandal in a way, but I just didn't. I thought he was just a peddler of some sort, you know. And it turns out that he was a direct influence on Satoshi, which is just amazing to me. I mean, it shows, the lesson is that you need to keep your eyes open and keep your mind open, most importantly, you know, to new possibilities. But the extraordinary thing is that he was ultimately arrested and tried and convicted for using the term dollar. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a funny argument, but it's true. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of amazing, because it's like the U.S. government says we own the term dollar, which is funny because there's also New Zealand dollars and Australian dollars and Canadian dollars. There's dollars all over the world, right? It's not just the U.S. dollar. So why can't there be a Liberty Dollar too, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Plus, he wasn't actually pretending that they were U.S. dollars. He was claiming that it was a Liberty dollar, you know? I mean, just like there's a New Zealand dollar and an Australian dollar. So it's totally legitimate. But the extraordinary thing about this is that although he had his company pillaged and he's lived through 10 years of hell, I think he never actually did any kind of time for this. I mean, he was never actually sentenced to any kind of criminal. He wasn't sentenced to jail or anything like that. He's been free for a very long time. And in fact, I think I saw him the other day at some conference that I was at, and he's a remarkable man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was at that Miami convention 1.5 years ago in January 2014. But yeah, he had been awaiting his sentence for many years, and it has now been like overturned. So he's now off the hook. But it shows you that even back then, the U.S. government was a little bit afraid of competition, I guess, right? I mean, they have the monopoly on money supply, which is such a convenient thing. and now all these digital currency come out, and there's certainly people in the governments who are getting a bit nervous about it.
It's pretty funny because I don't know how widespread Liberty dollars ever were. I don't think they really were. I mean, he had a small clientele and a relatively small market. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the U.S. government was so hysterical about the idea of preserving its monopoly that it went after this poor man, for no reason, really, at all. And that should have been a signal to me that Bernard von Nothaus was onto something, And in fact, I can remember Leland Yeager, and I don't know if you know that name. He's a great monetary economist. Met with him. And Leland Yeager wrote an article saying, this idea is not crazy. It could actually happen. And I should have, I mean, the signs were all around me, but I was still, sort of weirdly dogmatically attached to this idea that this was not possible, So, I mean, it's a lesson to me. Of course, when I fell for Bitcoin, I fell hard because I realized I had been wrong for most of my life about the subject. And completely changed. And now when I see Bernard von Nothaus, I greet him as a great hero that I think he is,
Yeah, and the other thing that I will say about the lineup of interviews in my film is I deliberately try to not have only white male young dudes, right, in the film, because that's a real risk. That Bitcoin is quickly perceived as being, another Silicon Valley thing. There's so many white dudes involved, but no one else cares about it. So we have Africans and Asians and women, of course. So it's important for a film to show that diversity, and especially when we talk about international remittances, we try not to only talk about the Fed, but about other countries as well. We talk about ancient history in Europe and the developments in Asia. So try to keep it as international as possible.
Now, how did you handle the political element? Because there are many people under the impression that Bitcoin is basically a tool for libertarians, and that the politics is inseparable from Bitcoin. What's your view of that subject?
Yeah, so when I started out with the film, I kind of dismissed that political angle altogether. I wasn't at all interested in that whole libertarian angle of it. I was interested in technology. But the more I got into money and analyzing what how the current money supply works, then very quickly you talk about government, you talk about central banking. And that's where we do cover a lot of ground about the flaws in that system. But we try not to make political statement on the left or on the right. We just say, okay, look, this is a central bank. It belongs. The banks who own the central bank benefit directly from printing more money, and it's all a debt-based system, and all these things. We talk about that without being anti-government per se. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and tell me what's your own political orientation? Do you feel like you have one? You're obviously curious. Did researching Bitcoin swing you in a libertarian direction, or you still feel what are your political views?
Yes, no, it did swing me definitely in that direction, but I try to keep it out of the film. I mean, obviously the audience is very libertarian, and people who are into Bitcoin are very libertarian, but I try not to have a biased film. In fact, I actually try as best as I can to have Bitcoin skeptics in the film as well. So people who say, well, the banks actually have an important role to play. And well, the government must control the money supply, which I don't agree to, but I think to have a real documentary, not a fanboy film, but a documentary, you have to show both sides. And so I try to keep my views out of it as best as I can.
What were your views? How did you actually get interested in this subject? Actually, I mean, why did you, of all people, decide to make a Bitcoin documentary in the first place?
I wrote a paper in my MBA studies, 2009, about local currencies, those script monies in Buffalo. I think they have one, or all these places in Switzerland. And ever since then, I kind of was interested in alternative money systems. Many years later, I started to, after working in the media space for so long and dealing with documentaries, it was inevitable that I start my first own documentary at one point. And then Bitcoin came up, and it was just the meeting of both of these worlds. And I thought it's a perfect subject for documentary because people don't understand what Bitcoin is. So it's a good topic to explain to people.
And were you worried about the financing? How did you end up financing this project? I mean, you had to live for a year and a half, without any kind of proceeds from the film. I mean, how does that actually work?
Yeah, it's very much like a startup, if you will, right? You have to raise money first, and I did raise some money on Kickstarter. So we asked for 10,000. We ended up getting about 15,000 on Kickstarter. But the rest of the films, let's say the total production cost were maybe 80 or 100,000. The rest is all out of my own pocket. So now I'm sitting here since 3 weeks monetizing the film, and it's hard to see all this piracy going on because I need to make that money back. I hope that the largest chunk of money will come from licensing the film to TV channels, to Netflix, to people like that who will buy the licensing rights. And I realize that just by pay VOD, I can never make that much money back.
Where do you how do you actually arrange something like that with Netflix? You have to market it to them, and they observe it, and then they adopt it as their own. Is it something like that?
Yeah, Netflix is exactly like that. So you have to meet them, and they acquire. It's a business to business environment. You go to their office and pitch films to them. So we're doing that. iTunes is slightly different. So you actually pay to be on iTunes. So I think it was $1,500. So now I have to hope that enough people on iTunes find my film and like my film, and so that was an investment. And other platforms like the Bitcoin guys or Vimeo, you just put your film up and then you charge a price and then you make some money back.
Has the Bitcoin subreddit advertised your film at all?
Yes, we're quite active on Reddit. We were on top of the list for a couple of days. Reddit is a good traffic driver. Twitter, obviously, we're quite active on Twitter. Yeah.
That's good. And you have competition. There are other Bitcoin films out there.
Yeah, well, there's no real competition. You can't really say one film takes away audience from another film. They're all a little bit different. So there's Life on Bitcoin, which is more like a historical view of how was it to travel through the world or through the US surviving on Bitcoin 2 years ago. Interesting. The other one is Rise and Rise of Bitcoin, which was very much focused on the mining aspect of Bitcoin. And I think they made one mistake because they track everything with the price of Bitcoin. What's the exchange rate today? So now if you look at it, it's a little bit outdated, but it's a very good high production value. They actually did see Mark Palace in Japan and visited the Mt. Gox offices. And my film is more about money, money and Bitcoin. How does it all play together? So I don't think it's competition at all.
Yeah. Do you expect that you'll be doing a more on the subject, or are you going to rest for a little while and just try to sell this one?
Yeah, well, the way it's looking now, I don't think I can afford another one. But let's see. Let's give it 6 months, 9 months, and see. Maybe some big broadcasters picks it up. And it's always hard for a first-time filmmaker to establish a name. But having won a few awards, and being so popular on social media, being pirated as much as we have, I think these are all good signs that the film and the topic is interesting, that the quality, the ratings, the reviews are high. So who knows what my next step is going to be.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do over the weekend. I'm going to go to Vimeo, or actually I'm going to go to this Atlanta pay-per-view company you mentioned, and use Bitcoin to watch it. I'm excited to do this now. Because that I still haven't. I'm sorry that I haven't seen it yet. So I'll be. It's called the Protocol.tv, the Protocol.tv, And also,
yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, thanks for that, and please do help us out on social media. I mean, you are obviously a very important and very viral voice in the space, and I do think that people will be interested. I know that your audience is going to really like the film. I mean, based on our reviews and ratings, this is good entertainment.
Well, I'll watch it, and then maybe I can just write an article about it. I have a piece coming out in the next couple of days about Bitcoin. I mean, one of the fascinating things that's happened since you finished your film is the Greek crisis, and that's actually really significant for Bitcoin. I mean, what we saw was Bitcoin's price firmed up, and gold fell, and to me, that's a very interesting thing. And now you have lots of speculation in the financial press that Bitcoin's become the new world safe haven currency, which I expected probably 2 years ago now. I expected that this would eventually happen, that gold would be displaced in its status as a safe haven currency and be replaced by cryptocurrency. Do you think that is happening?
Well, I do know that all these discussions about instability of our currencies and our money leads to more attention for my film. I can't make a statement to the macroeconomics of it. Actually, let me ask you, what do you think? I mean, with all these crises in Europe and in China, we haven't really seen gold going up. And the only currency that's been benefiting is the US dollar, which, if you think about it, right? I mean, what's wrong there? I mean, you tell me. I don't know.
Well, Bitcoin has, I mean, gold has serious disadvantages in a digital age. It takes up space, and it weighs a lot, and it's not easy. It's not very liquid, you know. Whereas Bitcoin has all the advantages of gold and none of the disadvantages. So, I mean, I felt like 2 years ago that the 6,000-year monopoly of gold, you know, as the premier monetary tool would evaporate in the digital age. So, I mean, it's been very interesting for me to watch what's happened to the Bitcoin price and the complete absence of any kind of effect on the gold price in light of Greece. I mean, that's very interesting. Yeah. I mean, in other words, we might have broken a 6,000-year streak. I mean, it's kind of a notable fact. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing when you think about it. Was Andreas Antonopoulos interviewed for your film?
Yes, he's in the film, and as you know, he's just so good on camera. It's hard to take anyone else into the film because he's spot on everything that he says. We had to cut him out to let some other people comment on a few of these topics. He's very popular as well, so that really helps to have him in the film.
Yeah, I think he's amazing. But he wrote an article for the institution I work for, the Foundation for Economic Education, called I think it's called Digital Money, Free and Unfree. And his point was that in the future, all money will be digital. We know this. It's a question of whether or not it's going to be monopolized by governments and therefore not innovative, not responsive to technological trends, and ultimately exploitative of consumers and their identities, or it's going to be a free digital monies. But the idea of, I mean, all money in the future will be digital. There's no question about that. It's just a question of whether or not it's going to be part of the free market or part of a government, a nationalized government system. That was the point of the article that he wrote for the Freeman. He's absolutely brilliant. I totally agree with this. Yeah. And it changes a lot of things for the agenda for monetary reform too, because I mean, for about 100 years, guys who think like me have been trying to push for a gold standard, Well, the idea that we're ever going to get the gold standard back strikes me as just preposterous at this point.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And that's why it's so important to discuss these topics, right? I mean, most people have no idea how money is created today, and that in effect, all your money in your paychecks and in your bank accounts and in your stock market portfolios, this is all just digital ledgers anyway, right? I mean, just people still think, you know, that it's actually coins or banknotes that is the value, but it's not. I mean, our money is already a ledger. But why would we trust this to the banks and to the governments that we know are just screwing us over? So, and that's why, I mean, Bitcoin has a real you know, legitimacy, I guess. And these topics are so important, and it's important to have these podcasts and these blogs and these discussions out.
Well, I'm very excited about this. The film is Bitcoin: The End of Money as We Know It. It was released, what, 2 months ago?
2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, sorry.
3 weeks ago. Okay, I've not done my part in promoting this, so my apologies. That's the purpose of this thing. I'll get it out there. I'm going to download it from Protocol, theprotocol.tv this weekend. You can get it on iTunes, and you can get it on Vimeo on a pay-per-view with a quick credit card. I hope the piracy does you some good. I mean, you know, my theory has been that you should never regret piracy. You know, it serves to promote the film. On the other hand, I can understand why you might regret piracy for every viewing that you're losing money. So please.
It's both good and bad. And some of these people are reviewing us on IMDb, so they give us a 9-star or 8 stars, so that also helps. So anything helps to get the word out, sure.
But at some point, you do need some money rolling in. So I promise you, I'll do my best. And any viewers that are watching right now, it's a good time to watch the film. If you like the film, let's spread it. You know, sometimes I think we expect that technology is just going to spread and grow and advance like automatically, as if it's baked into history. That's not really true. It takes films like this. It takes promotion. It takes entrepreneurs. It takes education and knowledge to push history forward. So I thank you for all that this film is doing to make that possible, and I hope to do what I can to continue to spread it.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Have a good night over there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Thorsten. Bye-bye.
Okay, cheers, bye. In peer-to-peer technology. So unfortunately, we're all over the illegal sites, but I would ask anyone to at least then send a small donation or something like that. Yes. That's
exactly the right way. Can you watch it with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so that's a small platform based in Atlanta, actually, called the Protocol TV. So you just shoot them a few coins, and then it unlocks the video. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I think it showed in Las Vegas at Freedom Fest. Am I right about that?
Yeah, correct. You were there, right? I wasn't.
Well, I wasn't able to watch it, but I was on the panel afterwards with Patrick Byrne, George Gilder, of all people, who was awesome, and a few other people. And so yeah,
Naomi was there.
Naomi was there, right? And we had a wonderful discussion. It lasted about an hour and a half. But I tell you, Thorsten, the room was packed. I mean, it was like you couldn't even get in the room. All the standing room was taken, but there were people outside in the hall, and many gave up. And this is in a big theater too.
Yeah,
first time I've heard anybody that price spike up to $1,200 was actually artificial and a result of Mt. Gox. Do you want to explain that anymore? Just because I'm curious about that. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, so I'm also not an expert. I think that there's 2 or 3 things going on. So first of all, there were automatic trading bots active at Mt. Gox, which kind of pushed the price up, and it was like all fake transactions. So that was definitely happening, and a report came out maybe a year ago. But now that the former CEO of Mt. Gox is arrested in Japan, Mark Karpeles, a lot more comes to surface, and he was fudging the numbers, and the company, turns out, didn't even have a bank account. It was all going through his private bank account. So there's a lot of things going wrong there, and now people say, well, that was typical at the time for Bitcoin. That was still amateur hours. Now we have professionals and the big Wall Street guys coming in. You mentioned Patrick Byrne earlier as one example. So yeah, it's the next step in the evolution of Bitcoin.
Well, you know, it's funny. I feel, I'll admit this to you, Torsten. I mean, I'm sure that there's plenty of wrongdoing at Mt. Gox. And actually, good evening, Liberty Meers, and everybody else who's watching. This is Jeffrey Tucker, CLO of Liberty.me, and it's my pleasure to welcome Torsten Hoffman here from. Are you in Sydney, Torsten, or
Melbourne?
In Melbourne, that's right, and that's where we met, I think, right?
We met in New Zealand, just next door, basically. Yeah.
Okay, in New Zealand. Okay. Well, yeah, that's right. Like I hang out in those parts of the world all the time, right? But you are the producer of the movie Bitcoin: The End of Money as We Know It. Where does that stand right now? Can we watch it online, or are you doing a slow release? Where is it? Where is it right now?
Yeah, no, I totally believe in releasing it as fast as we can and everywhere we can. So we are available for Bitcoin on a place called the Protocol TV. We just launched on iTunes, and most of our transactions actually come from Vimeo on demand.
Is that right? So they accept it's like a pay-per-view system at Vimeo?
Yeah, correct. And obviously, you know, as a filmmaker of a film about Bitcoin, there's a lot of piracy going on because the audience is very savvy. I heard that the response was people in the libertarian circles are getting more and more interested in Bitcoin. You've been saying this for years, but I think now we've hit that point. And I was very proud to get 2 awards at the event as well. So we won Best International Documentary and Best Libertarian Theme. So that's really, really great.
Now you're some experienced filmmaker, right? This is not your first project.
Well, I've been in the industry for almost 15 years, but it's my first one that I direct and wrote myself. I was executive producing many other documentaries before, but it's the first project that I am in control of.
And you were filming and writing and editing for a year and a half, something like that?
That's correct. Actually, the interview we shot with you was our very first shoot in Miami. The Miami, what's it called, Bitcoin South? I don't even remember the name of that convention. Then we went to Toronto, then to New York twice, to London, and here in Melbourne as well. So it was a 1.5 year period. We did a Kickstarter in between, so we raised a little bit of funds on Kickstarter, but most of it was self-financed by myself.
Well, you know, it's funny to think a year and a half ago, I'm trying to think this through. A year and a half ago, Bitcoin was approaching about $800 to the Bitcoin. And then you started the documentary, and then we saw this long slide down to, I think, as low as $200. In the course of this, did you ever worry that you had picked the wrong project?
Good question. Well, first let me say it turns out that this peak, right, was actually never a real peak, right? I mean, the more we know about Mt. Gox, the more it turns out that it was just falsified data or a fraudulent exchange. So I don't think Bitcoin were actually ever at $1,000. But yeah, I mean, certainly the buzz around Bitcoin has slowed down for a long time. I always thought that it's not about the exchange rate. It's not about the current news about this scandal or this arrest or this scammer. It's more about the technology, how it changes money, and the implication it has on central banking. So you know, I wasn't really worried. No.
I have to tell you, Torsten, as much as I follow Bitcoin news and opinion, that is the first